Glad you're here today. This is talking to children about gambling, what to say, when to start, and red flags to monitor. And I am Dr. Rachel Buhner. I'm the former president of the Kentucky Psychological Association and the current vice president of the Kentucky Psychological Foundation, which is the public education side of KPA. We are excited to present today's webinar with Dr. Jim Whelan from the University of Memphis and Dr. Meredith Ginley from Eastern Tennessee State University. Good morning to both of you, and thank you for being here. We are very excited and thrilled that you said yes to this. And so today we are going to be covering a lot of ground, and some of this is new information for a lot of you, but what we're hoping to give to you is some practical advice for how to start conversations and continue discussions with your family members about responsible gambling, and kind of what you need to know. Dr. Whelan is the professor and executive director of the Institute for Gambling Education and Research at the University of Memphis. Dr. Whelan, would you mind telling us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Briefly, I started this research and clinical work about 25 years ago when someone presented in our clinic well before Tennessee had any form of legal gambling, presenting with a gambling problem. And since then, we started by developing a clinic as well as trying to get some research to inform how to best help people and inform people and treat people. And since then, we've grown to where we're at now, where our partnership with the Tennessee Department of Mental Health, Dr. Ginley and I and a third colleague provide services across the state, as well as continue to lead the charge in asking questions so that we can be informed on how to respond to gambling problems.
Great, thanks so much. And Dr. Ginley, we are so happy that you said yes to the opportunity. So you are at Eastern Tennessee State University. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I am the clinical supervisor. So I'm helping to oversee the training of all of our graduate student trainees who work as therapists within our clinic and the clinical service provision that they provide. I partner with Dr. Whelan and our colleague, Dr. Fund, in trying to understand how to improve treatment outcomes related to gambling for everyone in Tennessee, but also hopefully more globally, I guess, everyone. We're trying to improve the research literature overall by understanding risk factors, which lead people to develop gambling disorder, and then how can we optimize the treatment if people do get themselves into trouble so that we're able to get them back to their goals and their values as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Wonderful. We appreciate you sharing your expertise here today. So we recognize for those of you who are viewing this in real time or watching it later on in KPF's resource library, that this is an important issue for a lot of you, and you're here to get some questions answered and to know how to approach the issue with your families in a healthy way. We want you to know that we're going to give you some information and some conversation prompts and hopefully practical advice, but none of what we're doing here today is medical advice. At the end of today's webinar, we will offer some resources if you need, if you have follow-up questions or would like to know more about getting with an individual provider, we will point you in the right direction. So with all of that said, Dr. Whelan, would you just sort of describe for folks kind of what the scope of the problem is? Why is this becoming or emerging as such an issue in your opinion?
Yeah, gambling has grown substantially over, quite honestly, the last 40 years. As soon as I think it's done growing, it decides to do something else. The industry does. And in this case, what we are seeing that is a Supreme Court decision in 2018 that said states have the right to offer sports betting. The result of that is we're now in a place where 34 states plus the District of Columbia do offer sports betting. Many of them offer it remotely. And about 6 states offer what's called iGaming, where that's kind of remote casinos. But I think that's just the sort of basic frame of the question. What has really come about is it's not about the legalization, which has pluses and minuses, but it's really about the commercialization, such that none of us can turn on TV without seeing advertising related to gambling. Or for many of us who are sports fans and our children who are sports fans, it's very hard to listen to talk radio, sports radio, to turn on ESPN, to read the newspaper, if anybody does that any longer, and not have references. And then finally, what we don't see as adults oftentimes is what our children are seeing, and that is the leaning in of gambling, the language of gambling, the images of gambling that's embedded in social media. Every form of social media has a fair amount of access to people talking about or their gambling or their wins, et cetera, et cetera.
It does seem like it's everywhere and you can't miss it when you turn on the radio or the TV or try to watch anything. Dr. Ginley, in terms of gambling addiction, in terms of young people, adolescents, young adults, kids even, can you talk a little bit about gambling addiction? I have a lot of my therapy clients who talk about screen addiction and that sort of thing. How does this particularly impact young people, these sort of addictive behaviors to these different things?
Yeah, so there's a range of behaviors that can result in kind of harm. Within psychology, we kind of use the DSM-5, which is a kind of our manual that helps us make guided and informed decisions about what is a diagnosis that is a mental health condition versus what is kind of general normative behavior that lots of people struggle with. And there's lots of ways that the DSM is useful and we love it. And there's many psychologists will have a long list of criticisms of the DSM. But within that guidebook, we have gambling disorder. It kind of has emerged as an addictive disorder, a behavioral addiction with its own set of classification and criteria. And then internet gaming disorder or gaming disorder, video game addiction is also in that DSM-5 as a condition warranting further study so a candidate, so maybe to the level of a diagnosable gambling addiction or same level as a diagnosis as the gambling addiction. And then the screen time, smartphone addiction, internet addiction, that sort of stuff is all the definitions of that are a lot broader and harder to pin down and haven't kind of been formally classified. But from a research perspective, we don't have as much information about that because the variables have been really kind of different and hard to quantify across kind of a national or international scale. From a clinical perspective, when people come in with any sort of behavior that they're saying, this is bothering me, this is causing harm, we absolutely kind of focus in and try to diagnose it. But it tends to be sort of from the population level, from the clinical level, is that we're seeing gambling specifically where people are risking that, something they value, money, on the risk behavior is causing the highest prevalence rates of harm. And then following that is the behaviors within the video game play. And that's more time spent and needing to spend more and more time. And that time and hours on the video games spent at detriment, causing harm and impairment in other areas of life. And we're not seeing kind of like the general like screen time kind of presenting in the same manner. But again, we're all calling it different things. So it may be that we're just not talking to each other in the same language. So we haven't been able to count up all our people and say that this is something to diagnose yet. But it's the gambling specifically. And I think it's that money piece and kind of how gambling fits within our culture that is probably, I guess, would be a hypothesis as to why that's where more harm and impact has started to arise.
In your mind, when is it a problem? I know that's a very big question and going to be different for most families, every family, I suppose, but you mentioned it's affecting me, it's causing impacts in my life. Is there anything else that jumps out at you or that people should kind of keep in mind in terms of a frame for when we are now in problem territory?
Yeah, I think that you're not able to stop kind of usually if something is like, I don't like that you do that. Like think of within your own relationships, right? If someone says to you, like, I don't like that you chew with your mouth open, any of those kind of feedbacks that we provide, if you stop and you change, it's not an issue. If you get that feedback related to your gambling and you can't stop, that's when that's a big marker. And then other people noticing, other people reporting on the harm. So impact on school, impact on work, relationships, those specific kind of interactional impairments as well.
That makes sense. And I think one of the things that kind of jumped out at me when I was thinking about questions for today, Dr. Whelan, we're here in Kentucky, a lot of us on the call today, and a lot of folks will be viewing this in the future, the sports horse racing capital of the world. And most of us have probably placed a bet on a horse race once or twice in our lives, to say the least. Parents may wonder if their gambling behaviors that in the past perhaps haven't been problematic have impacted their children. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the early influences of seeing your parents do the occasional gambling and how that might impact a child's, I suppose, openness to that sort of behavior?
Well, I mean, the parents are the primary role model for kids. What we do as parents, our children see, and in many ways they'll mimic, sometimes in front of us, sometimes not in front of us. When it comes to engaging in behaviors like drinking alcohol, or in this case, gambling, again, they're watching us and they're learning from us. They're seeing what's okay to do and what's not okay, which I then leads me to the suggestion that if you're doing an occasional gambling, you're not necessarily going to harm, because you're also showing that there are restraints, or as Dr. Ginley just talked about, there's ability to pull back and stop and not do it all the time. So placing that as a behavior that's under control may be a good thing. When we engage in the behavior to the point in which we're having problems as adults, it both plays a role model for that child, for that adolescent or even young child, to see this as a behavior that is okay to do, that's acceptable, and that the problems with it are acceptable. But in addition, a parent who has a gambling problem, now, and I'm not talking about the occasional race, bet on a race, going out to the Derby, whatever it might be. But if somebody's really having a problem, then we know that that could have an immediate impact on a child. And that immediate impact comes in a variety of ways that we as parents generally don't want to have happen. The big one is financial. But second to that, I mean, when the family loses money, that impacts a child very directly. But in addition to that, it's conflict within the home. It's the failure to maintain values and priorities that someone might have. And it also leads to more aggression in the home, possibility of neglect and abuse. There are lots of things that happen when someone's life gets absorbed in an addiction. That includes gambling. Those impacts, by the way, have a long-term effect. There was a study published last year, a large study out of Australia, that really showed that adults whose parents had gambling problems many of them were still feeling that impact, even though they were well into their adulthood. PTSD symptoms, depression, and the big one is they gamble and probably tend to gamble in irresponsible ways. One of the best predictors or risk factors for having a gambling problem is having a parent who had a gambling problem.
Okay, that's interesting. And Dr. Ginley, Dr. Whelan mentioned that, that parents have such a huge influence on kids in terms of what kids see and what they mimic. But I feel too like we're in an environment where, with regard to video games and sports betting marketing and that sort of thing, there are tactics being used to kind of pull kids in, pull young people in. Can you talk a little bit about the susceptibilities of young people and the tactics that are being used? Because I think parents probably have a lot of shame if they've contributed to the problem, but I think there's also sort of an existential threat out there too.
Yeah, and I think, as parents, I guess we show them some of the bad things we do, but we also show them a lot of good things and the values, and we help them build those values and those morals as well. So over kind of the developmental trajectory, kind of the shift of like who influences our behavior goes from being like when you're 2, 3, 4 years old, it's 100% your family and everyone in your home. And as you get older and you go to school and your peer group gets bigger, it's going to the proportion of influence is kind of going to shift more to that peer influence. And then we're all embedded within kind of our culture and our cultural norms and how much time kind of you spend doing different things. And I think I have a 6-year-old, so I'm influencing him a lot, but he's in kindergarten now, and now I'm hearing him come back home with these interests and these preferences that are being driven by his peer group, and that is when that peer influence will absolutely start to come into play. I think I was at a playground recently with a bit older kids, and they were talking about a game that they were wanting to watch, and were like, oh, I like so and so player. These were not old, these were like 10, 11-year-olds. Like, I like these players, I like these players. And then one of the kids was like, do you know the spread? And the kid knew the spread, and I was like, oh no, oh goodness, I wish I could have gone over and asked, like, how old are you guys actually, that you all know the gambling spread on this basketball game that you're talking about. But my kid heard that. I heard that. Every child at the playground heard that. That was very much within the dialogue and the discourse of how we talk about sports as friends in this public place with adults around, our friends around. And that's absolutely kind of changing the risk profile in a way that maybe wasn't present when I was a kid. When I was a kid, gambling as a kid would have been 100% illegal. It would have been happening, in dice games and bathrooms in the high school, not something that would have been so socially acceptable that we could have talked about it in the open. And I think that normative influence we know across all behaviors is that the social norms that we're exposed to change how we view risk. If everyone's doing it, we think it's safer. And that is going to, lead to behavior change in a way that could be more risky.
Meredith's 100% right. And it's in addition to that, it's what we perceive to be acceptable is what matters. And when you're talking about an adolescent who's trying to gain status within a peer group and develop their own identity, it's oftentimes driven by what they believe their peers find acceptable and positive, and they're going to mimic that. That's what they're going to engage in. And when it comes to sports betting specifically, we've got legends who are in sportscast, on commercials, who are telling you, who are making gambling part of the conversation about the game. So it's like, what's the best parlay? I mean, we'll find commentators making suggestions about it. Sports heroes that people say, oh, that's acceptable. That's really cool. If they say it, then that must be okay.
Yeah, and we're seeing the discussion and the chat about sports for kids who love sports, for humans who love sports. You spend a lot of your time, a lot of your group chat content is about sports-related content. And we are seeing some of our clients that are presenting to treatment, and these are adults that I'm speaking of. I don't have the corresponding data to be able to report in children, but being the person in the chat that has this inside knowledge and is really good at helping everybody else figure out the best bets to place is a really valued position. And it's a status thing. Like, you're maybe not an influencer, like Instagram famous, but you are in kind of your peer group, knowing this knowledge and having this access to this content is highly valued. And for some of our clients that seek treatment, and again, these are adults, but that's one of the hardest things to have to give up about gambling, is that when you don't talk about gambling, it almost is going to have to isolate you from this status position, this friend group, this peer group, this really collective, exciting experience of really being engaged in sports on this really high level. You get skin in the game, I guess, with your favorite players. You have talent and skill there too, which is really exciting for all of us, especially as you're going, you're developing your identity and you're wanting to be special and unique and important, and figure out your role in this world and in your friend group.
So we have the influence of families, parents in particular. We have, wanting to wield influence with your peer group, certainly. And then Dr. Whelan, we talked a little bit, I think, about video games when we prepared for today. Can either of you comment on sort of the role of video games and how that might play a role here in this?
Yeah, and I welcome Meredith, Dr. Ginley, to jump in on this right after me. But there are gambling has permeated and is part of many parts of life anymore. That includes the video games that many kids are playing, whether it's that they're actually putting money in or not. Although there's a growing rate at which in the game, a child can place a bet either on something like a loot box, which is like a there's a box there, and if you buy a ticket, you can open up that box and find out whether or not you get a skin that, or a different weapon, or something of value within that game. And then in addition to that, there are games out there in which they're actually like mini casinos. And a child, a player, could be a child, can enter that and wager. And in fact, we treated some adolescents who developed quite an appetite for betting in video games, and without their parents realizing, they were using their parents' credit cards for the most part, but without their parents realizing it. Meredith, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I worked on a research treatment trial, providing treatment for families and kids up as young as 10 for internet gaming disorder. And we would often see this, yeah, that they would use the parents' credit cards, or they would sometimes their friends' parents' credit cards to be able to buy like additional points within the game. And there are some countries in the world, like Scandinavian countries in particular, that come to mind, that have regulated the loot boxes and the gambling kind of within the video games, and said that like this is not okay. This is basically letting kids to gamble. And in the U.S., we've not taken those actions and those steps. But it does, whether or not kids are understanding this to be gambling, it's setting up some of these expectations that you put money in and you have this like really exciting opportunity, and you could get something for nothing, or something for very low value that becomes this higher value, and that pathway is potentially setting up a bit of an expectation for that. And as far as like risk factors, we see in children and in adults that end up going on to develop problem gambling, some of those early big wins. Many of our gamblers that present to treatment have this story of, I gambled for the first time with a friend. I didn't even like gambling. And then I, put in $10 and I walked away with 10,000, and like, I was hooked. Like I couldn't go back. And some of these games are creating similar experiences that then, you want to recreate because they were very, very fun and exciting. And again, with the kids in the video games, it's often you're in a game, a multiplayer game. So your friends are all there, and maybe they're your in-person friends or they're your virtual friends, but they all reinforce you for this big, exciting win. So there's this extra social component, which is, transitioning into your new identity is so valuable and so reinforcing. So I think that is another kind of risk within these video games as well. And then just the time spent on the games that it sometimes creates again, this is kids, families who are seeking treatment. It creates this separation of the child from the family, so that the kids go off into their rooms and play video games for many hours. And the parents don't understand the games, and the parents can't, these games are built, we're too old to play them. I think that most people like stop being so good at video games, they say in their 30s, because our reaction times just start to slow down. So it's the kids' world, and the adults don't have the same access and entry, which is special and exciting. But it makes this kind of separation from the kids and the rest of their household. And then with that comes less oversight. And that those video games are on some of the same platforms and servers. Like it's very easy to then be starting to gamble and without oversight, or kind of getting into seeing that behavior. You can watch many of our kids who played lots of video games spent a lot of time on Twitch watching other players play video games. And many of the Twitch content streamers are also streaming themselves gamble. And you can like your algorithm can put you right over there in a way that maybe is unexpected, and a parent wouldn't be knowing to watch out for, because it's the gambling games are also becoming more like video games and more gamified and exciting, and lights and sounds and excitement. So it may be that the kids are now watching gambling.
So we're really seeing some risk here that I think parents might not realize is present, because we're even in the absence of parents with gambling problems per se, you're talking about kids being exposed to that sort of dopamine surge of, winning something in the treasure box or the loot box in their video games. Parents don't realize how much that is happening over and over and over again as the kid spends a couple of hours on their screen. And so then you add into the mix peer influence, spending time with peers doing the same. You guys have alluded to a couple of different types of red flags. Dr. Whelan, in your mind, what are some of the things parents, families should be looking for in terms of concerning red flags or problem behaviors that may signal it's time for a conversation or an intervention?
Yeah, so, well, I would argue too that red flags are enormously rare when we're talking about any mental health problem. They're really about more yellow flags or more flags that say, yo, pay attention to me here. And when we talk about gambling, you can't go very far in the conversation before you got to mention, where's the money going? Because when someone's gambling, the more they're gambling, the more they're going to lose money, and they're going to find means of getting more money. So the idea that children have or adolescents have access to cash that's not being monitored in some way, you might want to rethink that and decide how long of a rope you want to give them, because monetary loss might be a key sign. Meredith mentioned the other sign, and that is isolating yourself, pulling out of activities that historically has been something you really want to do. You don't want to play sports anymore. You want to go in your room, going to go watch this, going to go do this. You're pulling out of those more social activities and engaging in more isolated sort of play. And that's a tough thing as a parent to say, well, when is it enough and when's it too much? It's it's part of social cachet to play video games, et cetera, et cetera. But knowing when your kid is gambling means you have to pay attention that what are they doing? Why are they doing it? You also see a lot more conflict when someone is struggling because of their gambling, whether or not they're 10 or 70. That disengagement from others is followed by a conflict with others and disagreements with other people. So they're the things you want to say, oh, wait, what's happening here? Because they're the key things that you'll see, but it won't prove they have a problem, but it might prove that a conversation's worth having.
Okay, so I might be seeing less of my child, and our interactions may be more conflictual, a little bit more difficult. In terms of conversation prompts around this topic, one of the things, Dr. Whelan, that you advised me on when we prepared for today was sometimes the conversations happen before a problem has emerged when you're talking about responsible gambling, for example, and kind of parameters for that. I don't even know if responsible gambling is the right way to say it, but you can talk more about that. And then obviously, if a problem has emerged, and we've seen some of those signs you just mentioned, but let's start with conversation prompts around how to talk to your kids about what they see in terms of the gambling that you do. And this is hopefully within the frame of, the occasional bet here and there, nothing problematic on the parents' part. How would you suggest that parents go about those conversations?
Well, the number one thing I suggest is parents don't give up your parenting role. As your child enters into adolescence, lots of parents start backing off saying, I don't have a control anymore. I don't have influence anymore. And that's not really true. It's just that you have to exercise it differently if you hope to be effective. And particularly punishment becomes less and less effective. Engagement and positive interactions become more effective. How to start this conversation is just to express yourself in a way that is not accusatory, that is not demanding, that is not punishing, but instead, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. There are two sort of venues or paths to follow. One is, as a parent, as someone who has influence over a minor, we should be moderating life, your own life as well as theirs. So, it's perfectly fine. Most people, over 60% of those of us in the US have placed a legal bet in the last year. So people are doing it, and that's okay. If it's fun for you, that's perfectly fine. But you might also want to give commentary, or give commentary of what you see on TV saying, yeah, gambling can make a game more fun, but let me tell you, you got to be really careful. It's like you get in the car, you want to put your seatbelt on just in case there's an accident. So you make parallels by monitoring and mediating what the child hears and what they inculcate, or they think about it, what they take away from that. And we as parents can do a lot of that conversations. And one of the things my daughters are now in their 20s, and one of the things that's so much fun when they're in their 20s is they tell me about things that I said to them when they were young, that half of them I didn't even know they were paying attention, but they end up saying, Dad, you once said, or you talked to me about this. And that's been so important. And I see in my friends, nobody said that to them. And it's kind of rewarding. So all those adolescent things where you think, I might as well just shove my head in a box because I don't think I'm getting across, you can get across. So that commenting about your own life, your own sense of control, the ways you deal with loneliness, the way you control when you do and don't bet, all those things, they're helpful to kids. The second element is when you as a parent have a concern, don't bury it, but express it with love and empathy. I know it's probably fine, but I'm worried about you. You disappear in the room a lot. And, I know for some people that's a problem. So that's a way of really being honest and empathic and not confrontational about it. The other thing, the opposite can also be an effective strategy, and that is to engage your child, your adolescent, in activities that are inconsistent with gambling. Reward them for, hey, listen, go to the supermarket with me. We'll get ice cream then. And I don't care if you're 5 years old or 15 years old, you still like ice cream. And it's not bribery. It's engaging in a social plan that will pull your kid out of the room. And you have to know, it's like we think about this with dogs, like when we're training a dog, what are treats they really like? And we save those for the important occasion. Well, that's true with human beings too, whether or not, again, they're 3 or they're 15, or I would say they're 60. If you know what somebody values, you can bring that value into that interaction you have with them that replaces the value they would get by betting.
Okay. Dr. Ginley, you mentioned a moment ago thinking about, we were talking about video games and talking about the influence of peers and things like that. Do you have any suggestions for folks in terms of conversation prompts around, the gambling, the loot boxes, the treasure boxes, things like that with video games, about how to talk to our kids about, when those sorts of things go too far? How would you approach those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jim is speaking to is like there's like a couple different like developmental points sort of where you might have to start having these conversations. And probably the more like advanced like are you gambling on sports kind of betting, those are going to be with the older kids. And some of this video game stuff is going to be quite young kids. And there's a lot of that is going to be around there's going to be kind of a combination of just like talking generally and then some amount of stimulus control. So like parents make rules about where things happen in the home, and how often and how long things happen. So I think of, with, how you can arrange your house. So if we know that kind of isolation and being alone and not observed can, be one of the things that where more harm happens. So when you buy the first video game console for the house, even though you don't want it in your living room because that is not your living room's aesthetic, you put it in the living room and there's no TVs in bedrooms. And that's the only video game, it doesn't go on the phones. Like those type of decisions, like that just becomes the household rule. And it can have a long influence on how, how things are. Maybe the siblings are not gonna have to share and collaborate and communicate, and cause lots of conflict and drive you crazy. But now you have this constant oversight and insight, even as you're watching dinner, about kind of exactly what the games are. And then also thinking of just being able to have conversations about what kids are seeing and how it's making them feel. I often, I have a 6-year-old and we watch, he loves YouTube and various shows on that. And, does he think it's real? And how would he know if it's real or not? And who would he ask if he wasn't sure? And I want it to be me. I don't want him to, go bring it to school and be like, I saw this weird thing. Like, do you know this weird thing? But kind of setting those expectations and creating that openness and transparency in the conversations. And then learning about, as Jen spoke to, like their interests and but also their friends, like knowing who their friends are. I think that can be another one of those, maybe those yellow flag type things that we would see with the video game play, is that the kids would stop talking about their in real life friends that they were seeing at school and would just be always talking about these other people that the parents didn't know, that they'd only met through games. And that was, the parents would come in and, now they were a bit further along in the problems. And they'd be like, that was the time, that's what I should have known. It was like, Sally had been their friend forever. They were like, nope, not friends with Sally. I'm just friends with all these guys, and they're all video game players. So I think being able to have those conversations about who are your friends? I want to know your friends. They can come over. Let's all know each other. That type of thing can be
sort of theme from both of you. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but it's real theme of staying involved, staying in the know about what they're doing, who they're running around with, the activities, the games they're playing, that sort of thing. That I'm picking up on. So that's really helpful. And this is a little bit off script, Dr. Whelan, but in terms of kind of how we talk to kids about why, Dr. Ginley said a moment ago, do you like it? How does that game make you feel? Or how does that win make you feel? How would you talk to young people about, a young person in your family about, the appeal of it? Or, if they think that they've got it or can predict the next winner, I think kids maybe likely have big egos, you know what I mean? And think, I know who's going to win. I watched the game last night, so I know how they're going to perform tonight. How would you talk to maybe adolescents about that sort of, the illusion of predictive power?
I think the most powerful thing to do is not to talk about that at first, but instead to talk about something that they are experts in and they do have experiences about. That you bring it into, for example, lots of kids learn now it's a good idea to wear a helmet if you're bike riding. So why is that a good idea? What other things do you do to make sure you don't fall off your bike and hurt yourself? Where do you ride your bike and where do you not ride your bike? So you're really talking about those social rules and that idea of self-control, even though there may be something, if your kid might say, well, I wouldn't ride my bike up on such and such a street. There's just too much traffic there. Yeah, that's right. So what do you do instead when you want to get onto the other side? How do you do that? So you get them to take something that they actually know about and you say, you were talking about this and it kind of reminded me about gambling, because I know they were talking about gambling on Sports Center tonight, or that game we were watching. And what do you think are the things you can do to stay safe there? It's not a bad idea if a kid doesn't gamble to tell them gambling's not good for you. Don't do that. I mean, that's what we've learned about all prevention. If the behavior hasn't occurred, then it's okay to tell them not to do it. The kid hasn't had sex, tell them that's not for you. That's not for somebody your age. But the thing is, once a kid's had sex, you can't tell them that anymore. They know that, no, there's good things that happen. And similarly with gambling, when the kid's already gambling, you can say, no, that's bad. Don't ever do it. No, you're beyond that. Now you got to teach them the skills about how to control the risks involved. And throw things on TV and watch them and say, oh, watch them do this. Like, for example, one time I did this with my one daughter. We turned on this thing about mountain climbing. And I was talking about risk with her. And I would say, oh, what are they doing so they don't get hurt here? And I literally just did that. And it's like, oh, I get that there. Can I transfer that to a new behavior? How do those rules here become real in a new situation? This as a parent, it takes time and thoughtfulness. So you can't just run through it. And it takes wanting to be an engaged parent. You know, you got to want to do that. You got to not discount that, hey, they're 14, I can't do anything with them anymore. You got to say, oh, what can I do? How can I have fun with them and engage them in value-driven sort of discussions without really saying, let's talk about values, you know?
Yeah,
That's my answer.
makes a lot of sense. I wonder, in terms of influencers and celebrity sort of influence, you guys talked a little bit about that. Dr. Ginley, we've talked about a couple of different conversation prompts. Anything you would suggest around, these are some pretty big names, some pretty big legends, like you guys said. And I know this extends beyond just the topic of gambling, but in terms of an influencer's impact on your child and kind of having those conversations, whether it's about gambling or something else. Can you talk a little bit about those conversations?
Yeah, I think again, that's kind of talking about, who are these people and how do they relate to you, and who cares about you in your life? Like whose values do we want to mirror? Who will come help us if we're hurt? Who do we call in an emergency? And there's all of these people in our lives that have different roles and influences. And making sure that there's conversations and modeling and context placed around, who are these people to you and who are you to these people? And can we think about like how we might want to value what they say as compared to what other people say. So if you have, a leader of your church group that will come and get you any day of the week if you're having a bad day versus some celebrity that you follow on Instagram who doesn't even reply to your comments. Like who should we care more about their feedback about what we should do and how we should have our decisions. But it's really, really hard. And again, this is something that you try to start as early as you can because there's a lot of power and influence, and the marketing is specifically built to be able to try to sway our opinions. And some people have good influence too. Like it's not all bad. Not all celebrity influence is bad, but being able to put it kind of in the context of who you would want on your list of advisors that's helping you make your decisions in your life as a person.
Okay. In these conversations, Dr. Whelan, should we be talking to kids about the long-term consequences? I mean, should we be to some extent talking about the potential catastrophes or the long game? Kind of what are your thoughts about that? You've already talked about building critical thinking skills and kind of generalizing, what are the safeguards that mountain climber has, that sort of thing. But talk a little bit about, should we be talking about this is how it can end up? I mean, are they ready for that?
I would not lead with that. We always think of the long-term consequences as something that's not likely to happen to us. So they're easy to discount. And when you think about children particularly, but adolescents even, their minds are not wired yet to do that long-term thinking. I mean, how many of us try to get our kids to save money and their thought all the time is, well, I'm saving it for what? You say college. I'm going to, what is college? Why would I go to college? That long-term thinking is not very productive. Now, you don't eliminate it from the conversation, but you might want to make it personal and real. Like, I'm really happy I had some money saved before I went to college because that let me do things in college that other people wouldn't do. Okay, so I can make those references to my own experiences and the long-term benefits. But to get young kids, even adolescents, to think through long-term consequences is kind of like trying to get a pig to peck. It just doesn't work.
Okay, that's helpful. In terms of sort of the psychological implications for gambling addiction and gambling problems in young people, Dr. Ginley, can you talk a little bit about what can happen if this is unaddressed or untreated?
So gambling disorder in general can have, many of the symptoms that correspond with this are symptoms of anxiety, depression, and those can be isolation, stress, worry. those type of things. We also see, and I don't have data to support this, Jim. I don't know if you have a number or range, but within adult populations, we see very high rates of suicidal ideation and a death by suicide as a correlate of gambling and losses from gambling, and just kind of the financial desperation, the psychological desperation of having had this really traumatic and devastating loss and diagnosis and impact from gambling. So that sort of the severity of the mental health corresponding symptoms can be that severe from this disorder. And that would be at the highest level, and is hopefully something that we can absolutely always prevent, but it can be quite dire.
Really
Yeah.
scary to think about desperation as a feeling that they're having, especially if they might be one of those kids who's isolated in their room, engaging in some of this type of behavior.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens with gambling is people dismiss how pervasive the impact is on a person's life when they have the problem. It's important not to blame the person for the problem because it's a complex story that got them to where they are. But we've seen people who've completely destroyed their lives. And I don't mean occasionally see people. We see a number of people who destroy their relationships where, we've had young men the last few years who were good job, steady relationship, and that partner leaves and they're devastated because they thought this person was going to be their life partner and they're no longer wanting to be near them because of their decision making and because they've destroyed their trust. Or the flip side to it, to be in your early 20s through 30 and basically have enough debt that you are carrying a mortgage in addition to trying to build a family, et cetera, is really very painful. And Dr. Ginley, Meredith's point about suicidality was really interesting. We have a friend, a colleague who does suicide intervention research, and he does it with the U.S. military because that's a huge problem with military personnel. And he said the marker of when someone's not going to respond to the intervention is an addiction history. That those problems persist and make it more difficult for someone to engage in taking care of themselves in a way that they can eliminate that risk of self-harm.
Okay. How do we treat it for young people if a problem has been noticed, or noticing money missing, or the child's relationships or different arenas of their life are being impacted? What sort of treatment, what's on the table for treatment options? What should parents know, Dr. Whelan?
So we're still at the beginning stages of understanding what is effective and how long any sort of treatment will last. But in general, we have some real promising indicators, and this is something we've been focused on, our team in Tennessee have been focused on the last few years. And that is, we know that a treatment that's founded in what we call cognitive and behavioral principles can effectively arrest the gambling problem for the majority of people who have been experiencing problems. Secondly, we also know that approach to treating them helps if the person helping them can help them stay motivated, but in addition to that, understands gambling and doesn't just apply a model for substance use with a gambling problem. You got to understand how gambling's different. So for example, and I know this is not about adolescents or children, but no one goes on a drinking binge. Somebody has alcohol use difficulties, goes on a drinking binge, believing that the end of this is going to solve all the problems in their life. Many gamblers start a gambling episode that way. I'm going to go to the casino today and I'm going to win. I'm going to enter into this dice game. And by the way, a lot of adolescents are engaging in dice games with friends. Once gambling is normalized, they gamble in a variety of ways. But treating them, cognitive behavioral treatment, embracing the need to keep the person motivated to work through those problems. And third, make sure it's really specific to gambling. Now, the fourth one I'd throw in, there's very little research on how to treat adolescents with a gambling problem. But what we do know is it helps to engage in the people that are important in their life, bringing the parents in, teaching parents how to have these conversations as we're talking about. And I fear that we may have been a little glib in talking about these conversations. They're hard. They're hard. It's easier to just walk in the other room. And learning how to do it right without getting angry or feel like I got to control this kid right now. They're the tough things. And when we're treating an adolescent who are having addictive behavioral addiction problems, that's important element of what we do to help them keep moving forward and gaining control and adaptability in their life.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking to something over the last couple of minutes. It's sort of like a noble goal. I'm going to turn everything around. I'm going to bring home money. I'm going to make the mortgage payment or whatever. It's a noble goal, but the idea here is it's problematic, has negative impacts, and it never pays off. So, okay, having those conversations is very tough work, but these are really helpful prompts. In terms of what you want, what you want parents to know coming out of today, you guys have given us some fabulous information, but Dr. Ginley, can you just sort of talk a little bit let's talk about parents of younger kids and having these conversations about the games and things. Can you just recap for us one more time, kind of how to approach those conversations?
So I think this is I think of it like the timing and the what, I guess, is part of trying to figure out. And as a parent, you're going to have to know your own kid. But when they're starting to get engaged in sports, when they're starting to spend more time with their peers, those maybe can be some markers of when to start having these conversations. And I think, we have some scripts, maybe you've had modeled or you've read a book, or maybe your parents did it for you, like the safe sex talk and the, drinking and driving talk. And I think we need to have the gambling talk alongside those big serious conversations that we're going to have with kids throughout our lives. And the safe sex talk starts with little kids in the doctor's office, 2, 3, 4, about consent and who can examine you. Can the doctor examine you? We can have similar kind of steps and markers of how we talk about gambling with kids. So, what is real? Understanding money. They talk about in school, but where does this money come from? People work for money. You just don't get magical money. Those type of things like that. Those conversations can set up later, harder conversations. But making sure that the theme of kind of like, let's talk about this. You can talk about this with me. I have information to share with you, but I want to hear how you would respond to that information. And then you can always talk to me. And I think where the most severe outcomes is, really devastating financial harm and impact and significant mental health distress up to suicidal ideation. We really want to make sure that we are introducing the conversations in a way that you can always talk to me about this. Like, don't ever feel like you're so isolated and alone that you can't speak to me. And then the specifics are going to have to be a bit of the what for your own kid. But if you can hold some of those general themes, I guess, in mind, is start early, it's an ongoing conversation. And ultimately what your goal is to have the open dialogue be part of the relationship.
If I can add one thing to that, and that is, don't expect to not be engaging in your kid and now all of a sudden have an influence on them. I was really fortunate when my wife and I had our first daughter, when we realized she was a girl, I panicked. How do I be a good father to a girl? I literally panicked. I was driving to go teach class, and the whole time I'm teaching class, I'm like, how do I do this well? So I went and I pursued friends, people I knew, colleagues older than me, who I knew they had daughters who adored them. And I said, how did you get your daughter to adore you? And what they both recommended was something that resonated in my life, and that is, as a father, make sure you have a special relationship with them. So for one dad, he had 5 daughters. And every week he would wake one of them up on Saturday morning and take them to breakfast, just them, just the one child, the one daughter. And he said they knew it was all coming and they all ignored when he woke up one and didn't wake up the other. And he said, always ignore when they say, oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. He said, because they'll have fun. And he did it for their whole adolescence and they adored him. The other father recommended something real similar to that, and that reminisced to me. I mean, as I was growing up, I really loved that my dad would have me help him do things in the house. I'd complain about him some, but I was the guy, so I valued that. That makes that influence when problems come up more likely to be real.
Yeah, well, trust advice and guidance when there's a real connection there. I think that's absolutely true. Okay, so any kind of parting thoughts, Dr. Whelan, for families, for parents in terms of how to be thinking about all of this?
Yeah, pay attention, be engaged, and don't give up being an active parent, even when you have signs that you ought to back off.
Ginley, anything you'd like to add for today? You've given us so much fantastic information.
Yeah, and I think also like all this technology stuff, like this is new. Like we study this all day, every day, and we learn new things all the time. And you all, like all the parents that are listening, right? Like you have whole other full-time jobs and whole other full-time things, right? And we're learning things even if this is our full-time job. So don't expect to know all of this. Like if you feel like I don't know how to start because I don't know about this enough, like just start. Like I think the good present parenting, the building the relationship is the start. And you can read things, you can Google things, there are books, you can call for consults, you can ask for help from providers, but it's okay to not know all of this. Learn from your kid, like have them teach you and help them help you understand. That open transparency is in itself prevention. So it's okay to not know.
I really appreciate your point too about how does it make you feel when you win? Like how does that part of the game make you feel? That's a really helpful one. I'm going to use that one tonight. And I appreciate both of you so much today for the very specific and then the general overview about what's happening and why it's happening. This has been such useful information. Is there anything anybody wants to add? Do we have any questions today? Don't think I've seen anything pop up in the chat. Thank you. Okay, well, that looks to be it. Dr. Ginley, Dr. Whelan, thank you so much for your time today and agreeing to be here. We appreciate your expertise so very, very much.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you. Marcy Timmerman is here from Mental Health America, Kentucky, and she just wanted to share with us a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. We have mental health screenings available online at mhascreenings.org. Should anyone have concerns about their child, the addiction screening isn't specific to gambling, but will help give you some guidance on the impact of someone's symptoms, perhaps. And there's also one for youth, parents concerned about their youth. So that's a great resource to have. Also, our website and our e-news at mhaky.org. So thanks so much for all this excellent information. Again, just to echo that from Rachel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marcy. And the Kentucky Psychological Foundation is excited that we were able to put on today's presentation for you, and we have many topics coming up in the future that are of interest. If you have ideas for more topics for us, please, you can submit those into the chat or visit us at the Foundation's website, which we will put into the chat right now. Thanks for being here today, and we will see you next time. And again, thank you so much to our panelists. We sure do appreciate you.
Bye, everyone.